Hello. Today, we are going to talk about pathways to inclusion. It is a Erasmus Plus co-funded project called Include3, and today, we are going to hear more about situation in Slovenia. Can you please tell us how employment of persons with intellectual disabilities is regulated in Slovenia?
The employment of persons with intellectual disabilities in Slovenia is regulated by many unrelated legal acts. It is a legal order that is quite lax, with many legal loopholes, and is difficult for the average citizen to understand. Thus, the employment of persons with intellectual disabilities is defined by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Act on Employment Rehabilitation and Employment of Persons with Disabilities, the Act on Employment Relations, the Act on Social Security, the Act on Pension and Disability Insurance, the Act on Social Entrepreneurship and the Act on Social Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. Depending on the expected ability of persons and the level of support they need at work, in Slovenia we know different forms of employment of persons with disabilities, disabled. The first of the forms is the open market, where disabled people are not offered work support, as they do it in workplaces where the disability does not hinder the work process.
Which forms of employment offer support to disabled people or people with intellectual disabilities in integrating them into work?
We have supportive employment, protective employment, social inclusion programs and protective work centers. However, it should be emphasized that, systematically, people with different levels of intellectual disability in Slovenia do not have the same opportunities. Thus, only persons with a mild intellectual disability can be included in supportive and protective employment, and persons with a moderate intellectual disability only in protective work centers and, exceptionally, in social inclusion programs.
Can you please explain the differences between those forms of employments?
Supported employment is defined in the legislation as the employment of a disabled person at a workplace in a normal working environment, in which the disabled person and the employer receive professional and technical support, and the working environment is also adjusted. In Slovenia, only individuals with a mild form of intellectual disability are included in this type of employment, as only those who achieve work results higher than 70% receive a decision on supportive employment. Protective employment is defined as the employment of a disabled person in a workplace and in a working environment that are adapted to his working abilities and needs. Employment is possible only through employment rehabilitation with a decision on protective employment. With the employer, the person concludes an employment contract in a protected workplace, which defines the method and scope of professional assistance and management of a disabled person in the workplace. Social inclusion programs are social programs aimed at supporting, preserving and developing the work skills of people with disabilities. They are intended for those who, due to their disability, are not employable according to a decision on unemployability issued by the Institute of Employment of the Republic of Slovenia after completion of employment rehabilitation, disabled persons of Category I with a decision of the Institute for Pension and Disability Insurance without the right to a disability pension, and persons with a physical disability and intellectual development, even with a moderate intellectual disability, who do not have the possibility of inclusion in appropriate social welfare services. Social inclusion programs are carried out by contractors selected in a public tender published by the ministry responsible for disability protection, in which the conditions for the implementation of the programs are determined. Many adults with mental health problems who have a more pronounced need for help, persons with moderate, severe and severe disabilities in mental development, are included in social welfare services and care and work centers, where they perform adapted forms of work that are intended for people who are unable to live and work independently and need help with care. These are management, protection and employment services under special conditions, which enable those involved to preserve the acquired knowledge, acquire skills and strengthen social habits with the aim of promoting creativity, a sense of usefulness, self-affirmation and enabling the user as much independence as possible. The aforementioned services, which include accommodation, food, technical care, transport and social care, occupational therapy, psychological and counseling treatments, are fully financed by the state budget. But let's take a look at some examples of how people are integrated into labor market.
That was a nice presentation, thank you. Anything else that you would like to share with us?
Yes, the main purpose of employment under special conditions is to prepare and train an individual for employment on the open labor market. There is not much data on this topic for Slovenia. There are disabled people who are employed in protective jobs, even though they have the skills to be employed on the open labor market. There are approximately 20.14% of disabled persons who could be employed in a standard workplace. The transition from a protected form of employment to the real labor market in Slovenia is hindered by the prejudices of employers, the lack of jobs and the lack of skills and knowledge of disabled people. The closest to the transition from protective forms of employment to the open labor market is integrated employment by daily protective centers and employment centers. If we wanted to achieve changes and improve the transition between protective forms of employment and the open labor market, in addition to radical changes in legislation and the improvement of employment policy, we should also improve the education system, inform employers and society, and eliminate communication barriers.
This was Pathways to Inclusion. Situation in Slovenia in the transition from disabled workshops to full-time employment. The production from the Include3 project was co-financed by the European Union. Want to learn more about Include3? Visit the www.include3.eu website and follow us on our social media channels. Thank you and best regards.